Okay, and with this, I can start with the introduction of Yes Europe, Young Leaders for Energy and Sustainability. If we can go to the next slide. So just a quick recap on our motivation, our reason to be. It's not a surprise for any of you that we're dealing with a big global challenge, which is the climate change issue, which brings a series of challenges and opportunities. And whoever is in the leadership in the next years will be able to define the direction that we set for how we enable our transition into a more sustainable world. So this is the background. And if we go to the next slide, we like to think of ourselves as we like to think of ourselves as part of the solution. So Yes Europe aims to empower young people to help accelerate the energy transition, and with that tackle climate change issues. And by giving this space and being this platform that allows young people to develop the skills and the knowledge, the expertise, the network necessary to become leaders in the energy transition, we believe that we are contributing to the solution. So if we go to the next slide. So who are we? Yes, Europe is constituted by a very diverse set of young professionals and students from different backgrounds, which is part of our strength. So we're gathering different expertise, different backgrounds, different mindsets and skills, and putting them all together into one single community that exchanges understandings and knowledge in the energy sector. So we are based all around Europe, as you can see in this picture, and we keep on growing in all sorts of all around countries of Europe. If we go to the next slide on how we work. So just very briefly, we are structured in such a way that we have an international European community and teams. So these are the teams that you can see here on the screen. And then we are also active on the national level. So each one of those little circles that you saw on the slide before, this is the countries where we are actually active on a local level, which is also part of our strength, because this allows us to have a very international European mindset, but also understand how there's challenges and opportunities on the local level, and empowering youth to act on their own countries. So if we go to the next slide. So just a quick overview of our activities. We're finally coming out of the whole COVID situation, so we are even meeting in person, and here on a very professional examples, so some activities that we have done in the past year and months, but we are also about being a community. So there's also an aspect of meeting, and whenever we are traveling, we're meeting each other, which is also very important for keeping the spirit strong in Yes Europe. We have a series of projects on knowledge sharing, such as the podcast series and the Future of Energy report, which is an annual report showing how young people feel about the energy sector. And I don't go into too much details. I also want to encourage you to have a look at our annual report. I've linked it on this slide, and I will share the link on the chat function afterwards. You can see everything that we have done on the last year. So if we go to the next slide. So now into the policy team, which is the team that was involved directly in preparing this project. So we are the team that really is trying to bring the understanding of energy policy into the Yes Europe community. That's because the Yes Europe community is normally very much, or was initially very much oriented towards technical topics. And even when we think about energy, many times we think about, engineers and all of these structural infrastructural issues, but there's a lot of policy into it as well. And we see more and more young people wanting to get involved in policy making, in advocacy, and so on. So what we do in the policy team is to try to somehow increase the understanding of what policy making looks like, and how can young people be part of it, essentially. We also have a big part of our work, which is to work with other youth organizations that are tackling same issues as us, so in policy making and so on. And we try to build projects together, such as this one, which is a collaboration. So if we go to the next slide, I think it's the last one for us. So this is the policy team. You can see it's quite a large team and still growing. We have open positions and we are constantly recruiting. So feel free to reach out on policy@yeseurope.org if you want to get involved. And that is it from my side. Madita, I think it's up to you now.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Madita from the Europe Africa Youth Network, and I will briefly present our organization. So as the name says, our focus is on intercultural exchanges between young people from European countries and African countries, as we believe that exchange is the best way to learn from each other, to reflect on the stereotypes we might have, and to understand important issues from different perspectives, and also to give young people a platform to exchange and to learn with each other. And we were thinking, we should use the technologies we have and build up a community in digital space and exchange on important topics. So most of our participants are students or young professionals, interns, and most of them are between 17 and 35 years old. And this is the focus on, the focus of our topics we exchange on corruption. So we had one exchange with a whistleblower. Then it's on a large part of our activities is on environment, as Yes Europe consider it as a very important topic. So we had a climate change training with young people from African countries and European countries, and then some speakers. And now on energy transition, we are a fairly new initiative, I have to say. So then a very important part of us is the intercultural exchange, to understand each other. And we work a lot with our former participants. So sometimes they come up and say, we would like to exchange on that. So that's how an exchange on social work was implemented last month. And in the future, we also want to focus on media and education. So here in the next slide, you can see some pictures of our exchanges on corruption. We also link the report in case you wanna check it out, and on our intercultural exchanges where you can see a Bosnian song playing, and on social work. And now I hand over to my colleague Benefik in Goma, DRC.
Yes, thank you, Madita. I'm Benefik Magaju from, I'm staying in DRC, and I work with the Europe Africa Youth Network. And Madita has already introduced a big part of the Europe Africa Youth Network. And here I can see the training that we have organized on the climate change, where we've been discussing about climate, like introducing young people on the climate change effect, the adaptation and mitigations, and also how they can get involved and how they can contribute as youth from Europe and Africa. As she mentioned, we had speakers from European side and African side, and we had really like a quite number of applicants, but due to some logistical aspect, we couldn't manage to accommodate all of those people because there were around 100 people. So we just conduct the training, and afterwards the certificates were delivered to those people. And so far we have conducted around 6 activity projects, because as she mentioned, it's still a new initiative, and we are growing so far. We are working with the people we've worked in the past on some of our activities, and this is how it is. So maybe, I don't know if Madita, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, for those who would like to join our initiative, I'm going to share the registration link. For those who would like to get involved, as we said, for the people who have already participated in some of our activities, they end up organizing some activities in partnership with the Europe Africa Youth Network team. And I'm going to share a registration link in case they are interested in joining activities, and then they are going to state how they want to get involved. And these are our social media platform: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and yeah, I think that's all. In case Madita had something to add. Thank you.
All good. We head over to Bea.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Benefic, and thank you, Madita. Indeed, I think now it's perfect timing to jump into the panel of discussions. Just before we get started, just to set the scene here, the topic that we will be discussing today is how can we start looking at the energy transition as an opportunity rather than a burden, and how can Africa and Europe work together to achieve it? So if I can just take a minute to set the scene, if we start with Africa, and as today, you know, you may know that today is Africa Day, or Day of Africa. I don't know how to translate it into English, but I saw the notification on my phone today. We're all more or less aware that in Africa there is some restrictions on energy access and limitations on power generation capacity and investment, making it difficult for African countries to grow economically. And we see that renewable energy has the potential to address some of these aspects. And energy investments in Africa have already shifted to renewable energy projects, which have been accompanied by a drop in the prices. And if we look at Europe now, energy access is not the biggest issue we are facing, not in the slightest. But I think we can all agree that one of the biggest issues in Europe is making the shift between a centralized fossil fuel-centric energy system to a more decentralized and less pollutant one. So we have here narratives that are quite different, but on some points, we're talking about the same thing. So we have the same goal, which is to decarbonize our economies. Both continents have a set of tools available to make the shift to a more sustainable and just energy transition, such as policy and development funds and the infrastructure and the technologies. On another important point that we have in common, there's the fact that the energy sector impacts millions and billions of people, in fact. So for the good or for the bad, whatever we change in the energy sector will impact the quality of lives of Europeans and Africans. And another aspect that we have in common is youth, because regardless of the continents, we know that our younger generation is more connected and is more informed, and we want to be part of the solution. So that's also a common point. So now I would just like to introduce you the speakers of today, starting with Duccio Baldi. Is an energy engineer focused on the energy transition. He combines a technical background in energy system with experience in other fields, such as energy policies and socio-economic impacts. In his last years as a consultant, he worked in Kenya. And he's currently working in his home country in Italy, where he uses his knowledge to help the national energy transition, motivating him to co-found Enco, Energia Collectiva. Gabriel Carson identifies as a digital dreamer, internet leader, and activist with a background and bachelor degree in computer science and over 5 years of NGO civil society experience. He uses his skill set in breaking complexities in the technology world through championing digital literacies and emerging technologies. He's also a 2018 Yelp Fellow of the Leo Africa Institute and sits as a board member of the Institute. Lea is a technical controller at Wien Energie GmbH and has a degree in engineering, making her master thesis on carbon capture and utilization. And finally, but last but not least, Tony Theo is the founder and CEO of Renewables in Africa, a clean energy engineering company and media platform which mission is to bring back power to Africa. He has worked as development engineer, project manager, lead consultant, and business development manager in several companies in the automotive and renewables industry. So welcome to all. If I can ask the speakers to unmute themselves and also, if possible, to turn on the camera if you have not done it so. And I would like to just start with the first question, and we can go in rounds one by one. What would you say are the top 3 priorities when it comes to the energy transition in European or African countries, whichever you are most comfortable with?
Is there any order to start, or?
Please go ahead, Tony.
Okay, no problem. So, by the way, hello to everybody, and a pleasure for me to be connecting. So I'm very much delighted. So I was told that I was going to speak to young people, and all of a sudden, you know, my gray hair felt even grayer. But having said that, so I've already been introduced, so no need to go back to that. So talking about the topic, so what are the three main priority for energy transition for as far as Africa is concerned? So I would say the first thing for me, it's first of all, and I believe you said it quite perfectly at the introduction, we shouldn't forget, first of all, about the energy access, because Africa is very much in a special position in the sense that most of the other continents are talking about energy transition because there is already enough power, or at least good enough for people to do whatever they want to do. And now the question is about how do we shift that from fossil fuel into renewable? We're not there yet in Africa, right? So we still have something like 52% electrification rate. There's a 48% of people that need to have that energy. So that's the first thing. We still need to plug the gap. So we don't want that that part of the discussion to be lost. Yeah, that's the first thing. The second thing I want to say, if we're talking about plugging the gap, so we want to make sure that as we plug in the gap, we then have an opportunity to make it in a greener way possible, and at the same time as well, decarbonize what has already been done. Because I would say 75% of the energy in the continent is actually powered by fossil fuels. So how do we decarbonize that? So that's the second question, obviously, that the energy transition needs to address. The third point would be, as we move into toward energy transition, what is almost implied without being said all the time is that we move into a fairer, better society where obviously people have more opportunity. It becomes that we shouldn't be losing the opportunity to empower people and to provide them the skill needed in order for them to move forward, especially for Africa, developing local supply chain. Because in Africa, most of what we see is the know-how tends to come from outside. Nothing wrong with that. At the same time, if you want the continent to progress, you need to equip people, give them the skills they need for them to move forward. And these, I'm sure you would have understood, will help to close another big issue, a gap for another big issue, which is unemployment. I'll stop there and leave my colleagues bring their few points as well.
Maybe, sorry.
Thank you, Tony. And please go ahead, Duccio.
Yeah, I was actually going to say thanks to Tony because you really raised a few very important points. And I want to build on that. I think my first priority will be education. So educating and teaching citizens, entrepreneurs, municipalities to actually learn about energy transition and with both pros and cons. So because we never reach an understanding, you know, the process and force the increasing demand for more sustainable energy and products, which of course are directly related. So without learning, there's no process. And that's my first priority. And we also experienced it with the startup in Italy. We're proposing at the beginning a fair and advantageous solution to economic, environmental, social issues. But people were very skeptical because they didn't understand it. So we both, and we understood that, okay, let's approach it differently. With explaining properly how things work. So they can actually...
sorry, the sound is breaking a little bit, at least on my side, and I think Chaluka also said the same thing. If maybe it's just the headphones situation.
Oh,
well, now it's even a little bit worse.
Okay. You want me to try without them?
Maybe, yeah, maybe we can try without.
Okay. Now, do you hear me better?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Sorry then for the little problem, technical problem, talking about, you know, technicalities. So yeah, I was saying that education is the first gap. So teaching people to actually learn and be protagonists in the energy transition. The second one would be, is also related to one of the latest questions we have in the panel, to stimulate private sector. Because of course, the two main reasons, let's say, that we saw in history that brought transition is that we're happening from the bottom, so from people. So we go back to the first priority, so educating people, but also when they came from the top, so where the capital is. So in this case, if we manage to push by strict regulation large consumers to switch to renewables, then we'll have a larger impact, of course. It's definitely difficult to find a balance and to push them, but in any case, without this push towards this situation with the bigger consumers, we'll still use fossil until the last drop. So we really have to focus on this. Third and least, definitely not the least one, we need to invest in infrastructure, renewable adaptation. Of course, this is more focused on Europe because we already have a grid which is working and is way more advanced, let's say, than the actual one in Africa, but it values also for Africa's situation. We really need to invest in the grid that will support a fully electrified market, which of course we aim to be decentralized. So in Europe, it will be a shift towards more sustainable, decentralized systems. But what we have now is an infrastructure that doesn't allow us to actually push with renewables and really move towards this energy transition. So I will leave to the rest to add.
Thank you. I'll just continue here then. For me personally, I was thinking about similar points as well, and I put it down in 3 words. So the first would be diversification, the second empowerment, and the third transformation. So starting off with diversification, I think it's a very obvious one when transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables. Renewables have the times of the day, or there are periods where they are available and then the times when they aren't. So I think it's very important to diversify. And I think in light of current situations, and as well as in general, I think it's really important to be diversified with your energy source to be able to provide a reliable energy to your customers, to be able to, for them to operate and do whatever they have to do, whether that is studying, whether that is making, doing business, whether that's operating in manufacturing. They need to have reliable energy for that. And diversification allows or ensures that a reliable supply is ensured. My second point would be empowerment, and it kind of links with 2 points Tony and Duccio mentioned as well. So with that empowerment, I mean decentralizing your energy infrastructure and your sources, and it would allow or empower consumers to kind of identify and have ownership in the infrastructure, and also, like, one of the side effects would be them being more, like, learning more about the infrastructure, being more able to identify with it. Because as it might sound, it's very fortunate for Europe that infrastructure works. At the same time, most people don't know how it works and what is behind it. So decentralizing would not just allow the consumer to be empowered by having ownership in it, but also to gain and learn about how energy works and where it's coming from and what it takes to actually switch on your light bulb. And the third point would be transformation. And I'd bring 2 aspects in there. The one would be personal and the other one would be intergenerational. So the personal transformation, I think specifically from a European perspective, I think we have to be very honest and we have to say there has to be a change in the way we consume. So consumption is definitely a factor that has to be changed as part of the solution. And then the second aspect, creating intergenerational transformations, so between young and elder folks, creating that change in, like, throughout the whole population. So specifically for people that grew up with certain ways of using electricity, of using resources, of having the habit of doing it and kind of probably continuing it until they pass, it's very important to reach those people as well. And I think as young people have a very important role in doing so. That's all from my side for now.
Thank you very much, guys. I think very valid points have been made. And just to begin, happy Africa Day to everybody. We need to know that we are living at a consumer 3.0 generation, meaning we are more intertwined into access. But when we think about energy, let's go back to think where it started since the discovery of fire and everything, that each stage of innovation has been catapulted by the access to energy. So for me, the most important factors will be first access. We need meaningful access to a grid, decentralized grid that is powered by local innovations. In terms of local clean tech, we do have some of that, and access to the rural sector that needs to be really accounted for, because, you know, in terms of Africa, we still have a lot of rural population that still is not connected to the internet. And when you think to an economic perspective, people won't forego having clean tech. Well, you don't have any access to power. You don't power your life. You still use charcoal and everything. So it's important when we have meaningful access built on innovations. And second, we need to reflect these governments to actually initiate these superstructures and the agency of the people. It would be great, and it will be easy to catapult it, since it will be more human oriented when it comes to innovations. And the second point is storage and transmission of this energy, because we need to know how to store the energy. Right now, storage and transmission, we are operating on very old grids, and so even if we do have solar and wind,
I think Gabriel is having some internet connection issues.
Storage is important blocks for this. And hello, can you hear me?
You broke just for some seconds, but you're back on.
Okay,
please keep going.
Great. I'm just going to my last point. And the last point should be, we are addicted to high hydrocarbons. I think it's true. We like to power our phones, our computers, our refrigerators. But I read somewhere that Bill Gates' refrigerator actually uses more electricity than one household in Africa. You see, so it sees it's very difficult for us to actually detach ourselves from this addiction to hydrocarbons. And I would say that it's time we get addicted to clean technology and to clean policy. And we need to get addicted to the purpose of laying a foundation for the next generation that they will question us personally as personal agents of these addictions to hydrocarbons, that we can find and facilitate new ways of actually catapulting clean and circular economies. And give them my points.
Thank you, Gabriel. Okay, so we actually touched upon similar topics across this first question: empowering citizens, education and skills, energy access, infrastructure, governmental support policies. I think there was even some repetition among all, which is good. It means that across continents we're looking into the same priorities. But I feel like maybe we have not touched upon the elephant in the room, especially for the case of Africa. If we go to the next question, I don't know if Madi, you want to just make it visible also for the participants. So the International Energy Agency estimates that 27 billion US dollars per year are needed to achieve universal access in sub-Saharan Africa until 2030. Where do you think this money should come from? Should we do the same order as first? Tony, if you want to.
So that means I'm having to chip in, isn't it? So I would like to say that money should come from Duccio, but I'm just joking. So no, it's you're right. It's the elephant in the room, because we all know, we understand that nothing will happen until we're talking about the money question. And that figure that you have, 27, obviously depending on what sources we're looking at, it could be 27, 30, it can even be 100 billion. So all we know is a huge amount, right? And it's even a huge amount, an even bigger amount for the entire world, because McKinsey, the big consultants company, came up with a report where they actually size it at 9 trillion per year between 2020 and 2050 for the whole year. Anyway, where should it come from? So clearly, I can see three main stakeholders here. So I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised me talking about government that needs to be that needs to do that, dedicate some money to make it happen. So it's already happening. It's I would say around the world, but it should be a little more focus, right, to make sure that then we have effective measures that are taken. So beside the government, I see as well the private sector, and for me, I personally believe the biggest part will probably come from the private sector, because the government is simply there to put, let's say, the initial risky capital, because private sector usually when they bring in the money, so you want to minimize the risk as much as possible to make sure that you get a return. So who should actually invest in first? So I see the government doing it. So now in the continent as well, government has very much limited budget, very low budget, if actually no budget at all. So that means they then need the third stakeholder, which is the international community, that should also put the money together to fund it. In the case of Africa, we know that the biggest investor tends to be the DFI, which is Developing Finance Institution. So that's the situation, how it looks right now. It's definitely not good enough for me. We need the private sector to step up. And I'm talking about private sector. I actually personally would like to see more of the private sector also in Africa per se. Because if you want to obviously fix your house, you should first of all start by doing something yourself before asking somebody to come and put in the money. So, and I believe from that standpoint, the capital market in Africa is still a little bit, let's say, afraid of putting the money. So when I'm talking about the capital market in Africa, I'm talking about people like pension funds, that could be that insurances, big companies. They're not a lot, but there are some. So the few are there. I know there are not few billionaires in Africa. I like to see them invest into the sector a lot more. So we wouldn't mind. By the way, talk about a billionaire, we all forget that Elon Musk initially is South African. So he may want to invest into his country of origin first. So yes, I think that's what I would say. So summarize government, private sector, but the international community as well. And for me, I would want to see a lot more Africans doing it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so if I put this 27 billions, Tony pays the beers. That's the deal, right? Okay. Now, jokes aside, I completely agree. I mean, the private sector eats at least from my perspective and my experience, one of the main stakeholders that has to intervene. So I don't want to add anything more to what Tony said, because I underwrite all the things he said. I can bring some example to make it a little bit more or less overlapping. And while I was in Kenya with the German government, so with GIZ, we actually ran a project like this. So integration of private sector with humanitarian agencies and local governments. So what we did is to actually build and run a mini grid in the Kalobeyei camp of Kenya, so in the Turkana region, where there was this double approach, where the German government granted the infrastructure. So of course, one part grant, because of course that's still how the procedure works. And the other ones with the generation part. So the distribution part was covered by the German government, while the generation part was covered by a private sector partner, which is an American company. And all of these was under the umbrella of EAYN. So there was a regulation, so a link between the private sector, humanitarian agencies, and of course the bigger corp, which is EAYN. And of course, the main important stakeholders, the Kenyan authorities. So there was this overall approach, which of course led to what? German government granted the distribution infrastructure, which was given to Kenya. So they were of course happy of having something given that they can also use it now for refugees, but in the long term, they can use it for rural electrification of host communities. So there's a double reuse of this approach. And of course, the private company didn't search for a 2 years payback time, not a 1 year, 2 years, but a longer one, an 8 year run out after our calculations. So there was also like a certain approach from their side, which wasn't in search of only money, but there was a plan. It was regulated by the Kenyan authorities, so there were some tariffs. So refugees have to pay a legal tariff set and regulated. So it was not a free market. So these four stakeholders approach led to have in 2020 600 connections, which doesn't seem a lot, but I've dedicated my last years of work on refugee camps and settlements, and it's already a lot. And they implemented it, and this kind of approach has been replicated in other camps. So this combination, of course, in the short and medium term, can lead to what? To the long run, where I see and hope that all this money coming from electrification will arrive from national government themselves. But of course, we have to build infrastructure. We have to first continue this supporting, and then to leave them the complete ownership of the procedures.
Thank you. Really interesting points. The way I read the question, or I'd answer the question, would be more from an international perspective. So focusing more on the international money market, who's ought to pay? Is it coming from Europe? Is it coming from Africa? Is it coming from somewhere else? And I think that is a very important question that needs to be answered. And I think I'm probably predominantly speaking now to my European fellows in the room. From a European perspective, I think it's a very important question to be answered as well. And the common approach from European governments and nations is, it's probably being aware that there needs to be some sort of responsibility taken, and being aware of the state of development European countries are in, and contributing to the maybe not as developed. And despite going in the terminology right now, whether developed and less developed and all that these terms itself carry, I probably challenge that thinking, because I think we need to be very careful that at the end of the day, we don't start replicating history with going in somewhere from a European perspective, whether that's chipping in money, whether that's chipping in expertise, and then patting ourselves on the shoulder for achieving something, and feeling good about ourselves, like putting us out there as good guys. And the reason I'm saying that is I'm just going to share a few observations I've made, and I think just some things European policymakers, European activists need to be aware of. So going back in history, a lot of resources have been exploited on the African continent. So coming in now and just changing this resource from fossil fuels to now green energy, I don't think will do the job. I think we can't just change the source and keep the prevailing power relations. I think there needs to be a shift in power relations. What I mean is, I think it's not good enough to just create like unilateral flows of money or capital or expertise going from one continent to the other. I think we need to create partnerships and equal stake on the table. So I'd probably be as bold and say that money, or like a point Tony made as well, which I really appreciate, is the African capital market, I think is a key partner and a key player in it. And as well as Tony and Duccio mentioned as well, the private sector. But with the private sector, I think there needs to be something very important, which is there needs to be some sort of regulation. Why am I saying this? Because yes, the money is in the big consumers, but at the end of the day, a household of a single parent with 3 kids deserves access as much as a manufacturing firm. So there needs to be some form of regulation that ensures equitable access to energy. So yeah, that would be my points on that.
Great, thank you guys. You know, there was an IMF report in 2020 that showed there was about 5.9 trillion investment to fossil fuels in 2020. So this means when we think about funding is there, but most of the funding that comes to the fossil fuels generation, because that's how the whole economy is structured. You know, we still power is labor, you know, the labor force needs to be powered by energy. And this is the difficult thing that happens. But as most of people have said, the most important financing first in terms of Africa, we need to find alternative funding sources, because not all of us have access to bank. We have underbanked, and there's so much bureaucracy which comes to international structures of finance, which acts as very many barriers of entry. So first, there's so many startups and young people who have circular economy projects, but they lack funding. You know why? Because it's still structured in a way that's very difficult to enter, but they do have very many solutions which are sustainable in terms of the locality of the nature. So first, we need to find how private sectors, as we said, and venture capitalists can train and equip and empower these young people and these innovations in terms of improving the whole aspect of a circular economy. I see there is also crypto financing with carbon tokens, but the problem is that when you create a crypto token, it takes a lot of energy. You see, that's a lot of energy. So in terms of game theory, this is a conflicting situation. You know, it's still a zero-sum game. There's no winners. So alternative financing in terms of Africans, if one cannot have physical money or physical paper, can you use crops? Because we are very good in terms of agriculture. Can you use other mechanisms? But this has to be developed by an understanding of the local situation. And the local situation is that people cannot actually afford to pay a lot of money to be equipped in the power grid, you know, which is actually not available. But if we create, in terms of renewable community grids, which are alternative financed by the local situations, and that would be good. And African developed banks, the development banks, should set public funds on how people can actually intertwine themselves in accessing the financing situation, and especially to people generating renewable energy resources. And public funds are important, because in the end, if we say we leave it to international organizations to fund, it will be difficult. It needs to develop at the local government level in terms of how we tax. We implement a carbon tax in terms of how people can do alternative financing to boost themselves up, and multilateral banks to support at a very local level how we boost others. And still, capital markets are still important, and Africa has emerging capital markets, and we need to pump so much money into the capital markets, and they need to be prioritized in terms of clean energy technology, which is important. But also we see most of the emissions come from large corporations like ExxonMobil. And large corporations are the ones who actually push so much emissions and so much destruction to the environment. So how do we deal with that? And how can we hold these organizations accountable? Because we need to create a very stable accountability structure that whenever you push for emissions, or whenever you don't adopt these mechanisms, you need to be taxed and fined higher. And these taxes have to be brought to places like Africa, where we have a really growing young population, and we account for very low emissions. This means if we can actually invest in these young populations, they're the ones who will create a new allegiance to how we power the world. But it is important that it starts very locally, with the meaning and the purpose attached to it, because the skills and everything are there, but the financing is actually very difficult to catch. And now we need that multilateralism in terms of really local financing through the multilateral banks, and improvement of the capital access. And each mechanism that we choose, it has to be accountable with low emissions, because we see that even with the 5.9 trillion investment and subsidies given to organizations or corporations which lead to emission, there has been $11 billion in terms of losses just to cover those emissions per day. So it's still not sustainable. And I think financing needs to be developed locally, low bureaucracy and multilateral cooperation in terms of actually accessing this in a very equitable manner. And each access, when I say each access to financing, needs to be meaningful in terms that it empowers people to actually operate on their own, so that local grids can actually attach themselves to power each and every community.
Thank you all. We heard very different perspectives here, which is quite interesting, but also reflects the different backgrounds of the participants for sure, and the different wherever they are coming from. If we go to the next question now, I think reflecting a very current issue, and maybe also reflecting different answers on that. How does the Ukraine-Russian conflict, and with it the urge to reduce dependency on Russian gas, affect the energy transition in Europe and Africa? In your opinions, of course.
Okay, I guess just to keep the same order, just to make it easier. So let me again jump into that. Very, very topical question. And first of all, the one thing that we could all say that it may sound like a localized conflict, but yet again, it affects everybody around the globe, right? Simply because we live in a very much globalized society, right? What happened in one part, yeah. And it's almost like, as we usually say, so we are one body, yeah? So in Africa, there's a word called Ubuntu, which means that we're all together. It's a bit like you think about your body. So if your foot hurts, clearly it will sort of bother the rest of your body. The same thing here. So how does it affect the both continents? I can see a short-term and a long-term impact, right? So on the short term, definitely, especially for Europe, who's sort of primary seat here. So at least for once. So obviously it's not laughing stuff, but like I say, this is not something that the continent has experienced for a little while. We could see all the big challenges he has brought, right? All of a sudden, because Russia being a big supplier of gas, 40% coming from Russia, all of a sudden it has brought up to the surface lots of issues, the risk, the issue of energy security. And because energy is so central, like I said, I usually like to remind that to everybody I'm talking to. That means like everything, having access to energy is almost like a human right these days, because the society we're living in is a society, is a life of convenience. And the best example is even today. The only reason we are able to talk to one another now, it's because obviously we have internet, that we have a laptop, whatever, powered by something. So you definitely need power. And because of that that threat of not having enough gas, so Europe had to think about immediate solutions. So that's why all of a sudden some of the power plant that was fossil fuel sourced, basically, that was going to go obviously in the back burner. We're probably going to slow down that. If you see, for example, as well, in the US, they've opened up some oil reserve, because another impact that we've all seen, and that is experienced everywhere in the world, it has increased also inflation. We already had issue with inflation before. Some people will say that actually it was in preparation of the conflict, but clearly that has accelerated that. And pretty much everywhere in the globe that you're talking about, you have this issue of inflation. So that's what I see on the short term. So it may have a little bit slowed down the short term, the march of renewables, because we need power like right now. But at the same time, on the long term, it sort of has brightened up a little bit the horizon, because now we understand that, especially again Europe, saying that okay, we should have been moving a lot faster, right, to decarbonize the industry, to bring about new sources of energy. I think somebody's yeah, okay, new source
Tony, sorry, you are muted. Maybe it was unintentionally.
Okay, you didn't like what I was saying? Have I been too controversial? No, I'm joking. Yeah, so I'm insisting I need to have my free speech. So yeah, so we're seeing that on the long term, how, like I say, he has brightened up the horizons for renewable. And now you can see now countries like, or pretty much all the countries, the major countries at least, Germany, France, Spain, they all want to go further, faster. US as well. And from the African perspective, it has opened up some new opportunity. First of all, like I say, as a new supplier potentially for gas for Europe, but also because now we also start reviving some project whereby we could use Africa and the renewables energy that is in Africa to obviously trade part of it to Europe, to south of Europe. Back in the days, long time ago, there used to be a big project called Desert Tech that was looking at how can we use solar from the Sahara Desert to power south of Europe. It didn't work at the time because it was way too expensive, and we didn't think it was the right type of project. Nowadays, with the current conflict, it kind of revived this sort of thinking. So that's how I can see the short term, which sort of for me, I've slowed down a little bit the progress of renewable because we need power there right now. But in the long run, sort of open up lots of opportunity. But in between, we all need to deal with inflation.
Yeah, again, I agree with Tony. And I want to go back to the other question because I think it's strictly linked, since we're looking at a scenario where, of course, African countries are using diesel mainly to run their electricity production. Of course, cost increased. So the way to shift towards renewable has a cost. So the capex, the initial capex that you have to do this kind of investments is needed. So we go back to the main issue that the world, let's say, brought under the energy shifting perspective is that we have a nation which runs on diesel, which may or may not import from Russia, which most of the time is not. And of course, you need to supply this demand and you have to invest in it. But of course, you're already spending most of the budget towards, for example, I talk about humanitarian agencies. They focus on food, shelter, and other kind of organizations. So you miss this capital since you're using it to actually, as Tony was saying, to supply this demand which you need, because you cannot stop an entire continent because you need capital to actually produce electricity. So this is one of the main issues that the war brought, let's say. And again, the opportunity, yes, for several African countries is there, so they can ramp up and speed up the production and exportation of crude oil or natural gas. And these I think about Northern Africa, with Italy as well. We're already trying to set new deals to have more import of gas from the northern regions instead of Russia, of course. But again, these will face against what we're trying to do. For we, I mean, let's say the organizations to electrify in a green way Africa, so to provide electricity in a smarter way rather than a more fossil-based one. And this will create this double facing where you actually need to provide electricity, but you have to ramp up the production, so you're actually going to pollute more. And this is kind of the controversy that I see with this, with the current status and plans. Another thing that comes to my mind is, of course, the reaction that African leaders had to this crisis, because of course, Ukraine was tackled very firmly from European actors, so the European Commission, the European countries, USA, and other big, let's say, nations, important nations. And of course, this crisis set way more interest rather than, for example, under the humanitarian perspective, so all the refugees, instead of the current one that we had since many years that was occurring in Africa. So the reaction that African leaders had of this urgency that European Union, USA put towards Ukraine was unbalanced to what was really happening in Africa. So, and I think also about the supplying of LNG from America instead of, again, other solution more close by. So these are more or less the controversy that I saw in these 3 months of, sadly, war. And one opportunity which scares me personally a little bit is, of course, the need to supply the rare elements that you need for the green transition. So Europe said, okay, we're gonna get rid of Russian gas, but of course we have to supply with what? With increment the production from renewables and other sources that can give us baseload. So we will need more elements to do this transition. And Russia is the world's fourth exporter of rare elements needed for the transition. So I don't know, copper, nickel, platinum, a lot of elements. So if we have to shift the buying of these products from Russia to Africa, that will, okay, on one side represent an opportunity for the countries, but on the other one, we know the history of mining in Africa. So the unregulated markets, the slavery and everything that happened in the mining sector. So it presents an opportunity, but also, again, as we were saying at the beginning, it has to be regulated in a fair way for the African countries and for the workers.
Thank you. This question is actually really, really relevant for me personally in my professional life. Just to give you a bit of a background, I'm currently situated at Austria's largest energy plant, which is a combined power and heat plant, so conventional energy powered with gas. So when we received the news, when things unfolded, it was very uncertain going in every day whether we'll be able to power our plant that day. And just to put it in perspective, our plant is providing electricity when it runs on full load for over 50% of the whole city. So not being able to power would have had a massive impact on everyday Austrian people. However, and with that as well, considering the gas supply, our power plant is supplied with over 80% of Russian gas. So it just like highlighted that massive dependency we have, not just in general. So it was an immense shock initially. But I think, and that's a big but, I think it was simultaneously a massive opportunity. So there were three observations I've made, how perspectives have changed and shifted in various stakeholders. So considering population, you can, even just looking at heat pump orderings in Austria, they're going up immensely. People considering decentralized energy systems to install at home to ensure that they aren't reliable. And that's individuals, everyday people taking that step, which is brilliant. The second observation I've made is stakeholders and decision makers being more willing or more open to renewables. So considering any form of local governments or mayors of towns and cities, previously to protect the conflict, they may have been not willing to give away land or to provide space for large-scale renewable installations, whereas now they're much more willing to do so, which is a brilliant development in that space. And thirdly, again, a regulatory shift as well. You can tell that on a national level, governments and regulations are shifting to support those very initiatives and to support moving away from extreme dependencies on whatever source or whatever country they may come from. So I think, in short, it was a very big shock in the beginning and just highlighted a massive dependency, but it kind of triggered to us to get creative and ensure or start diversifying. And it really has, I think, I believe in the long run will have a positive effect when it comes to transitioning Europe.
Great, I think very many great points from all the panelists. I mean, we should discuss how it doesn't need to take war for us to realize how dependent we are on one another. Why? It comes at so much cost of human life, like the Russia and Ukraine crisis have shown us how globalization and how we are intertwined with superstructures. Now that we are in a conflict, how do we deal with this? We see matters of inflation and everything, but just to realize is that we still are operating on a very colonial aspect in terms of power regulations. There's so many people who are coming to Africa now, like, okay, can you give us some power? So because of the conflict, but still you come under the agreements that Africa is still not powered that much. We still at a majority percentage the continent, and the money comes in and they say, like, we need to distribute to Europe and everything, and majority it's Europe. Africa is still underpowered, and you're coming to invest in fossil fuels while we see there's a European Green New Deal, there's a new green in America. There's so much rallying theoretically in terms of needing to save the world, because we are actually... Can you mute, please? Okay, because we're saying we're running out of time. We're running on time. That's great. But when we get a crisis, you're like, I think we can wait a little bit because powering people with fossil fuels is more important. Don't you see there's a moral crisis there? Yeah, you see? So what? it still makes you think, like, how do we do this? We need to invest first on the local innovations. And if we are bringing to power up the world, at least we could have an enforced hybrid options that even though you want to power, because power is important to the labor force and how the world operates, it needs to be green and circular in particular matters. So we can detach ourselves from fossil fuels. And we see there's a rise of populism in the world. So people are getting more detached, and populism leadership has really drawn us back. It has caused the war, you see, and this has been so difficult. So terms of governance and leadership needs to be very important now. We need to go back, and this is calling to all young people. We need to be very active in choosing the leaders who are actually aware of the problems we face, because we have decision makers who are 59 years old. In 2050, most of them, I don't think they'll be here, but we will be here and we'll be talking like, okay, so what did you do? You're like, we just got the money and continue with fossil fuels. It shouldn't be like this. We need to improve leadership. Young people need to take initiative in the table. If there are no tables, this is one of the tables. But we need to be more vocal, making more noise in terms of demanding these things. But we need to see it in an aspect that it shouldn't be colonial, because it's still centralized power still has a way to enforce itself. Even though they come to distribute and everything, transmission of energy and everything, if they want fossil fuels, and actually most of our governments will go for the money. So what? It will be very difficult to achieve the emissions targets that we have. And still, and the most important thing is that we should not wait for war for us to make a change, because it comes with a lot of cost of human life. So why don't we develop local solutions, actually green solutions, which are meaningful? And as young people, we're not fighting this war. There's so many young Ukrainians in Russia who are not even, advocating for this. So it's important that collectively we form a superstructure and agencies as young people to reflect on the purpose of what we want, because in the end, the next generation will ask, what did you do? And it's up to us to actually be accountable for that.
Thank you all. And I think, Gabriel, you already are making the perfect link to our next and final question for the panel of discussion. And I apologize, everybody, that we got a bit delayed. I think the interventions were very, very interesting, and we were afraid to cut off what our panelists have to say. So if I can ask the four of you to keep it super brief for this last one, and maybe in just 1 or 2 sentences, very bullet point sort of intervention, answer to this final question. What role do we, young people, play in the energy transition? What do we need to understand in order to help accelerate a sustainable energy transition? So please, just in 1 or 2 sentences, what is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely will brief on that one to understand the time constraint. I'll say, so we need first of all more discussion, just like what we're having right now. And I can summarize what I would love young people to do a lot more. Number one, you need to inform yourself, because I think if you don't know what actually are the challenges, you can actually act on them. You need to be knowledgeable on the topic. That's number one. The second thing, they need to also organize, just to make sure that they can have an impact, organize and see what else they can do. And the third thing, they have to act and actually implement whatever plan they put together. And it needs to be a political aspect, economical aspect, and social aspect. So those are the 3 points that I will want young people to do, or advise young people to do.
Thank you. Duccio?
Maybe Leah can go before me because she has to leave.
Thank you. I'll be quite quick as well. My advice would be being bold. Like I've mentioned before, so and a point Gabriel mentioned as well, it's sitting in a room with engineers who have been working at a plant for 40 years, being used to it being powered by gas, and then you come in as a sustainable energy engineer and are supposed to contribute. And I think boldness is very much required. So whether you're young, whether you feel inexperienced or not knowing all the facts on the table, I think we need to be bold and step up and challenge, especially as young generation, because we will be still sitting on the table in 30 years time, but most people that are currently there won't. So that's my point.
Yeah, I built on that, saying that we have to be bold, we have to act, but at the same time, we also have to understand who we have in front, and we have to try to reach them also. Don't see it as too much passionate, but the heart of people. because if they understand what we're doing and what we're trying to do, then they're going to make them aim at a more fair world. So of course that will lead to a more sustainable one. But if you reach like the person inside, then all the work we're doing, all the hours of, you know, intense meetings and all the things we are continuing will make a reason and will make sense.
Great. Nelson Mandela once said, it seems impossible until it's done. We see Greta Thunberg and Vanessa. These are young people who are actually taking initiative and they're challenging the world. Even the leaders are actually shocked by the agencies that these young people have. So it's important, as you said, boldness needs to come, confidence. But in the end, we need to make noise. It doesn't matter whatever. Young people need to make these meaningful noises to actually challenge all the leaders which are there. If you don't have a table, build it. If you don't have a door, then build it like this. We're creating these platforms, but with collaboration, it's easy to break that competition of fossil fuels. So if we organize together, it will be really important. And in the end, just remember, we are in debt to the next generation and to civilization, because now we are actually decision makers and we will make the decisions which will impact the world 50 to 100 years to come. So when your children or your relatives or other people come in 30 to 40 years, you need to say that, you know, I was in a room that actually contributed to sustaining the world. So it's important and it begins with us. And to everybody who's here, remember this message that we can do it. Let's just be bold.
Thank you all. This was really a great and very interesting panel of discussions, as mentioned already. And Madita, if I can ask you to share the screen just to give the information very quickly on the breakout rooms before, just to remind the participants. We're going to launch the breakout rooms right now. We'll have 15 minutes to discuss with the three of the four panelists. Leah unfortunately has to leave earlier, but Tony, Duccio, and Gabriel will stay each one in one breakout room. If you can go to, I think it's the next slide, if you can, to show which breakout room you can go towards to discuss which topic. Yes, perfect. So you will see that the topics are identified as such. Each panelist will be able to elaborate a bit more on their thoughts on these specific topics. So you can choose the breakout room that you prefer according to that. And we will be back at updated time, 7:55 CET time.
So normally now.
If you try again.
Normally now you can see the breakout rooms and you can join. So pick the one you're most interested in.